Ladies and gentlemen, Tucker Carlson detects Nazi like behavior from the Israelis.
How is this different from what the Germans did to civilians in World War II? It's different in its scale, thankfully. Is it different in its intent? It's hard to see how. And if it is different, how?
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review. And of course, the notion that Israel is perpetrating a genocide in Gaza is incredibly prevalent, both on the right and on the left. Classic horseshoe theory at work here. But we have some voices taking it further. It's not just a genocide, it's just like the Nazis. Here's the mirror image of Tucker Carlson on the left, Hassan Piker.
At the end of the day, it's a genocide. At the end of the day, this is an apartheid state. And Zionism as an ideology is a racist ideology. And many Jewish thinkers are now also coming to terms with that, even if they had self-identified as Zionists their entire lives. This transformation.
So you would compare what's happened in Gaza to the Holocaust?
It's not to the same extent, no, but I have compared it to the Holocaust, yes.
This way of thinking now runs so deep. You have random people at Graham Plattner events in Maine saying a Nazi tattoo is okay, but a Star of David?
Totem pole tattoo, the Nazi tattoo. How do you kind of...
Somebody said that they talked to somebody who had seen one of those or wore one of those, and it was silver, and it didn't even occur to him that it was the same thing. I think people are making as much of it as they can because they don't have a lot of substance around anything else. And if they did, we'd hear about it, believe me. They are trolling for dirt.
What if he had like a Israeli flag tattoo or something? Would that be a deal breaker?
For me?
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah.
That would be
Israeli? Yeah, because I don't support genocide, and he doesn't either.
Absolute crazy town there, but that's a Graham Plattner-based voter for you. Now, in this video, I'm going to show in detail why it's completely wrong to accuse Israel of committing a genocide in Gaza and totally perverse to compare Israel to the Nazis. Now, first of all, Israel's detractors oftentimes focus on statements made by various Israelis, some officials, some not, that supposedly show genocidal intent in the Gaza campaign. Tucker has been on this kick for a very long time.
The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, said out loud in a public speech, the Palestinians are Amalek. Amalek, a reference that many in the West didn't get, but everyone in the region understood. And it's a reference to 1 Samuel 15. The first verses in it, which you should read, because it tells you a lot about what Israel's doing now. But those verses describe God's command to eliminate a tribe called the Amalekites. And not just the draft age men, but all of them, including children and infants. All of them. Kill all of them. Destroy all of their property. Slay all of their animals. This is God's command. So when Benjamin Netanyahu describes the Palestinians as Amalek twice in the first month of the Gaza operation, you don't need to guess what the point of this is. The point is to destroy every man, woman, and child and infant in Gaza.
Now, this is an old chestnut from anti-Israel voices, and it relies on a total distortion and misunderstanding of this phrase. Remember what the Amalek did to you. What that means, what the Amalek stand for as a symbol, is total unprovoked hostility and cruelty towards the Jewish people. It oftentimes comes up in the context of Holocaust remembrances, and it obviously applies to Hamas in contemporary times. And the speech, one of the speeches where Netanyahu made this reference, you can see what he means by some of the rest of the context that people like Tucker Carlson always leave out. Whoever dares to accuse our soldiers of war crimes are hypocritical liars who lack so much as one drop of morality. The IDF is the most moral army in the world. The IDF does everything to avoid harming non-combatants. Again, call on the civilian population to evacuate to a safe area in the southern Gaza Strip. Now, you can say Netanyahu exaggerated there, or he didn't accurately portray how the IDF would operate in Gaza, but what you can't say remotely honestly is that is a speech signaling genocidal intent. Israel's enemies also focus on a statement very early in the war from the Israeli defense minister at the time.
On October 9th, so 3 days after the Hamas attacks, the defense minister of Israel, their own Pete Hegseth, described his plans for Gaza, not for Hamas, for the entire territory, for the over 2 million people who live there. And we're quoting, no electricity, No food will be allowed in. We are fighting human animals. Not human beings, human animals.
Now, it is true the defense minister at the time, Gallant, said those things, but it's clear from the context he was referring to Hamas fighters. And after the unspeakable savagery of the October 7th attack, are we really going to be that offended by an Israeli official referring to Hamas fighters as human animals? Now, he was indeed announcing a siege of Gaza, a totally understandable military tactic in the circumstance. Now, in their desperation to make the case that there was genocidal intent on the part of the Israelis, a lot of the critics of Israel cast the net really widely to include people who have no responsibility for the conduct of the war or no governmental responsibility whatsoever. Here's a New York Times piece a couple weeks after the start of the war, cites a co-director of a think tank in Jerusalem who's collected 286 statements since October 7th that he classifies as having the potential to incite unlawful behavior. His list includes, I'm not going to say all the names here because I'll mess them up, his list includes an Israeli pop singer, the wife of Bibi Netanyahu, and a host on Israel's right-wing Channel 14. I'm sorry, people might say a lot of stupid and hateful things, but that doesn't prove that Israel set out to commit a genocide in Gaza. As for these totally preposterous comparisons to Nazi Germany obviously set out to destroy the Jewish population of Europe. First, they had Einsatzgruppen go out and gun down Jews in mosques. They realized this was inefficient, had other problems from their perspective. Then they set up the camps and the gas chambers. We're the equivalent of the Einsatzgruppen in Gaza. We're the equivalent of the camps or the gas chambers. They don't exist. What we've seen instead is a grinding campaign of urban warfare. And in the best of circumstances, war in the urban environment is gut-wrenching and highly destructive. Consider the Battle of Mosul, 2016 to 2017. Iraqi government forces retake that city from ISIS backed by our air power, a highly destructive campaign. Estimated 5,000 to 11,000 civilians killed out of what was a population prior to the conflict there of 1.5 million people in that city. Estimates go as high as 40,000 buildings damaged or destroyed. In western Mosul, in the old city, some neighborhoods see 80% of their buildings destroyed. Hospitals and mosques are destroyed and bombed in some cases by coalition forces because ISIS is using them for military operations. Let's put a pin on that point, by the way, because we'll come back to it when we're discussing Gaza. But does anyone say this is a near genocidal campaign rather than just a highly destructive, again, military operation in a dense urban environment? No, they don't. Sticking with Iraq, there was the second Battle of Fallujah in 2004. We go in and clear out terrorist insurgents. Something like 50,000 structures in that city. Estimates go as high as 10,000 buildings were destroyed, and then half or two-thirds of the remaining damaged in some way or other. 200 mosques in that city, 60 of them roughly destroyed during the battle. Again, the terrorists used them for military operations. Did anyone say this was genocide rather than a tough, bloody urban campaign? No. If you go back to the 20th century and the Vietnam War, that's where we get the famous statement, we had to destroy the city in order to save it. Some people doubt the veracity of that quote, by the way, because it wasn't attributed to anyone in particular, but it had to do with the city of Ben Tre. During the Tet Offensive, communist forces take the city, and to retake it is extremely difficult because, again, we're operating in a dense urban environment. Same thing during the Tet Offensive in the city of Hue. About 40 to 50% of that city is destroyed. 80% in some places. The old imperial city in particular sustains unbelievable damage because that's where the communist forces dig in. So again, the lesson is when you're trying to get an enemy out of an urban environment, it's extremely difficult and is going to entail a lot of destruction. Even when you have no intention whatsoever of killing any civilians, in fact, when you're trying to liberate civilians, you can kill a lot of them by accidents of warfare. The invasions of Normandy in World War II, I think most people consider one of the most righteous, if not the most righteous, major military operation in United States history, and it kills between 11 120,000 French civilians, or they're killed in the fighting between the U.S. and the Nazis. Our heavy bombardment from the air and artillery can't be precisely targeted necessarily and kills a lot of people by accident in a terrible tragedy. So you have two phenomenon here that are separate and distinct. You have genocide on the one hand, and you have urban warfare on the other. And because the latter, urban warfare, is inherently destructive, you have people with pernicious agenda saying that destruction constitutes a genocide when these are two separate and different things. And Israel has taken all sorts of steps to try to limit the damage to the civilian population in Gaza. The military writer John Spencer has been very good on this. He wrote this in the Post last year. Israel has taken extraordinary steps to limit civilian harm. It warns before attacks using text messages, phone calls, leaflets, and broadcasts. It opens safe corridors and pauses operations so civilians can leave combat areas. It tracks civilian presence down to the building level. I have seen missions delayed or canceled because children were nearby. I've seen Israeli troops come under fire and still be ordered not to shoot back because civilians might be harmed. Israel has delivered more humanitarian aid to Gaza than any military in history has provided to an enemy population during wartime. More than 94,000 trucks carrying over 1.8 million tons of aid have entered the territory. Israel supported hospitals, repaired water pipelines, increased access to clean water, and enabled over 36,000 patients to leave Gaza for treatment abroad. The IDF has coordinated millions of vaccine doses, supplied fuel for hospitals and infrastructure, and facilitated the flow of food and medicine through the UN, aid groups, and private partners. The U.S.-Israeli Gaza Humanitarian Foundation alone has delivered more than 82 million meals, 1 to 2 million a day, while weakening Hamas's control over aid. Now, you don't do any of that if you're determined to commit genocide. Now, the criticism that can be made of Bibi Netanyahu's policy towards Gaza prior to October 7th was that he was too soft and accommodating toward Hamas. If he wanted to kill everyone in Gaza, why didn't he start years ago? He didn't. He was happy to have a kind of accommodation with Hamas where they occasionally rocketed Israel, but otherwise stayed within their box. Now, this was a disastrous misjudgment, as we saw on October 7th. But if we're talking about genocidal intent, this was clearly the opposite. He wanted to get along with Hamas to the extent he could. And is there really any doubt that if Hamas stood up as a traditional conventional force and hurled its divisions against the IDF, it'd be defeated in short order, and then Israel would stop blowing things up in Gaza? But Hamas doesn't do that, of course. It does the opposite. Now, according to some estimates, the ratio of combatants killed in Gaza to civilians killed in Gaza is low compared to other urban battles. Don't want to put too much weight in these numbers because the estimates are all over the map. There's a lot of advocacy involved here. But it's worth remembering that in Vietnam, for instance, I mentioned those examples of cities largely destroyed during the Tet Offensive. You had communists showing up and instantly efforts to try to get them out that took a very long time and entailed a lot of destruction. Here in Gaza, you had Hamas having years and years to build tunnels, to fortify, to make its plans. So that just made it even more difficult to extricate this terrorist organization. They built tunnels under hospitals, under mosques. They used schools for military purposes, and their deliberate strategy was to use civilians as shields to the maximum extent possible, because part of the objective here was political warfare, political information warfare against Israel, and to make the argument that Israel was killing civilians in Gaza and therefore its entire enterprise was illegitimate. And we have critics of Israel, of course, embracing and spreading this narrative. And they love the Nazi charge. It gives them a cruel pleasure. It represents a total inversion of truth and morality. There is clearly a genocidal force in the Middle East right now. It is Hamas, which, if it could get its way, would wipe the Jews from the map of the Middle East. And if that catastrophe ever happens, the people who have delegitimized the state of Israel by accusing it of being a Nazi-like entity will bear significant moral and intellectual responsibility. Hey, by the way, do yourself a favor, comment, like, subscribe. I guarantee you won't regret it. I'm Rich Lowry, over and out.